In 2019, my brother ran and successfully finished his first ever ultramarathon, London to Brighton, a 100 kilometers ultramarathon. Two things really impressed and inspired me about this. The first being the distance, 100 kilometers, that is a massive feat of endurance, that's roughly 62 miles. I had only ran a marathon when I heard about him doing this challenge, so I was very impressed and I was surprised that people were actually doing these kind of distances. Number two, the furthest my brother ran in training in one single go was 10 miles. Yes, you heard that right, 10 miles for a 100 kilometer ultramarathon. Needless to say, he had a pretty bad experience on race day and it was a lot harder than it should have been had he done a little bit more training. But nevertheless, I was inspired at the fact that he made it across the line. Looking like a zombie, admittedly, from The Walking Dead, but he still finished a 100 kilometer ultramarathon. He was really annoyed afterwards because he knew that had he done more training, he would have had a much more positive experience. He would have got a better time and he wouldn't have had to have gone to the hospital just to make sure that everything was okay, because he had very minor kidney problems throughout the race and they were really playing him up in the day after the race. So obviously not too good. Loads of things learnt there. He said that he would do it again one day, and I sort of jokingly said off the cuff, yeah, I'll run it with you. For me, that seemed like a massive effort, but sure enough, I did enter into London to Brighton. COVID delayed it by a year. 2021, last year in May, I did the London to Brighton challenge and I successfully finished my first ever ultramarathon. Since that moment, I've done 4 ultramarathons. They haven't all been smooth sailing, but I've done distances of roughly 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers, and I have successfully completed a 100-mile ultramarathon. So in this video, I want to share with you some of my top tips and what I've learned from my 5 ultramarathons, so that hopefully you can learn from my mistakes and you can maybe learn a few things that you might not have thought about before. But I just want to say, I'm by no means a professional runner. I'm just an amateur that loves this sport. I think it's absolutely fantastic. Running is something that I love to do. So yeah, take my advice at your own discretion, and it is by no means gospel, just things that have worked for me. So without further ado, let's go. I've learned that to run ultramarathons, you need to up your training volume significantly. An ultramarathon is by very nature anything greater than a 26.2 mile run, the standard marathon distance. So if you're gonna compete or just race for your own fun and enjoyment in an ultramarathon run, you need to be naturally doing a lot more miles and kilometers than you normally would do, just to make sure that your body is physically fit, all the muscles are equipped to deal with the demands of running such a great distance. With an increase in training volume, it's really important that you look after your body and you don't go overboard in your training sessions. A top tip is to take it nice and easy in training. And if you've ever heard of the 80-20 principle of training, that might be something that you could think about incorporating into your ultra training regime. So that roughly means that 80% of your runs, you're going to take at a very nice, easy pace in zones 1 to 2, possibly even 3, heart rate zones that is. And for the remaining 20%, you might want to consider doing them at a higher intensity, zones 4 and sometimes even zone 5. And that's just a nice ratio to make sure you get a balance of good training over big volumes that isn't going to be too strenuous and put you at risk of an injury. Because obviously we want to be running for as far as we can, for as long as we can in the race without any problems. Thirdly, I've learned that your choice of footwear is absolutely critical for your ultramarathon success. It makes sense to be choosing and running in a shoe that is appropriate for your event. So if you're going to be doing an ultramarathon that's mainly on the road, you probably want to pick a road shoe. If it's mainly on the trail, pick a trail shoe. It's very important that you try on the shoe and you're absolutely comfortable with it before race day, and don't make the mistake that I made during the North Downs Way 100, my 100-mile ultramarathon that I successfully completed. I wore these really tough, rigid, inflexible Salomon shoes that just weren't equipped for the hard baked trails of summer, and by mile 40 my feet were in absolute agony and I didn't have any more shoes to change into until mile 82 at my drop bag. So that was not fun, and it would have been a lot easier if I just tried a pair of shoes beforehand for a similar distance to make sure that they were comfortable. So my top tip is to prioritize trying and making sure that you've got the best shoe for your ultramarathon. The fourth main thing that I've learned is that nutrition can make or break a race. Running such a long distance in ultramarathons means that there's great demands on your body, and you need to appropriately fuel yourself so that you don't get tired and perform poorly, or even more seriously risk injuring yourself. The last thing you want to do is to be dehydrated, not nourished properly throughout the run, because that's going to have bad consequences. Fueling is something that takes so long to get right, and it is a massive problem for so many people. I think one of the main reasons people pull out of races has got to be nutrition problems, and it's usually stomach issues from food causing digestive problems. I'd highly recommend trying out a few different nutrition strategies on long runs, 15-20 mile long runs. See what works for you, what can you keep down over that long period of time and distance. And once you've got something that seems to be a winner, stick to it. Personally, I found that energy gels work quite well for me, and Tailwind or any kind of sugary electrolyte based drink on the go. But that's not to say that I'll always stick to these particular nutrition elements. I may well put some solid food into my racing nutrition strategy in the future, but it's working for now. So yeah, find the nutrition strategy that works for you and stick to it on race day. I've learned the hard way that training on a terrain type that is similar to the type that you're going to be running on in your ultramarathon makes life so much easier. When I did the London to Brighton ultramarathon last year, that was mainly all on trail, and I hadn't really done any training on trail up to that point, and the terrain was really tricky, quite technical in places, and then there was quite a few hills, and I just wasn't really prepared for that, being mainly a road runner up to that point. So I would definitely advise that you think about what terrain you're going to be running on, and then making sure that you do a lot of your training on that kind of terrain, because it will make life so much easier on race day. Ultras can be quite hilly, and what I mean by that is the elevation can change quite a fair bit during an ultra, even on road-based gravel paths. So I think it's important to get some hill workouts into your training regime, or at the very least just some elevation training in your regime. You could find a tall hill in your local area, do hill repeats up it. If there's a really long gradual incline, you can do that a couple of times a week. Just make sure that you get some hills and some elevation in your workout, just so that you are able to cope with it on race day, because if you're not prepared for hills, they can quickly take their toll on you and make race day very miserable very quickly, as I have found out on a couple of occasions. Something that is important is to make sure that you enjoy yourself whilst doing this ultra running. We do running because we love it, we love this sport, and when you've got fantastic views like that just behind me there, or whatever view you happen to be enjoying, whatever view you happen to be running through on one of your ultramarathons, it's important to enjoy it, and just to remind yourself, how lucky you are that you can run, and just remind yourself that you're doing this because you love the sport. It's important to keep the motivation up sometimes, especially during those dark moments. Perhaps one of the hardest things to learn as an ultra runner is to know when you have pushed yourself well beyond your physical limit, and you may have had enough, and you may need to pull yourself out of the race and do a DNF. I did not finish. This isn't something that ultra runners like to think about, but it is unfortunately a reality of ultra running. I had experience of DNFing in my first ever attempt at a 100 miler, the Thames Path 100 this year. I was injured at the start of this year. In March I only ran about 18 miles. In February before that I probably ran about 17 miles, and in April my leg, which was injured, my ankle even, got a little bit better. I upped the training a little bit too drastically in a short space of time, just wasn't physically fit for race day. Nevertheless, I was determined to give it a good stab. About 40 miles into the race, I knew that I'd had it. I was not in a good way, wasn't fit enough, wasn't strong enough, just wasn't enjoying myself at all. I did a death march like a zombie from mile 60 to mile 73, then I had to pull out at mile 73, and I knew that I had enough. It's important to know this, to know when you've had enough in a race and when you need to pull out during an ultra marathon, because if you don't and you carry on, you could risk doing yourself some serious damage and just not enjoying the race, and that's not what you want. And inevitably, if you are in a particularly bad way and you're going pretty slow, you will probably be timed out, and you probably won't make the checkpoints anyway. So it's a hard one to learn, but I think it takes humility to know when you've had enough and to pull out of the race. So yeah, that's my top tip: know when you've had enough. I've learned that having the right gear can make a world of difference during ultramarathons. It's important to invest in the right clothing, the right tech, and the right safety equipment, just so that you have peace of mind that you have all the stuff you need to be able to give it your all safely on race day. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about you know, a sports watch to monitor your progress, really good shoes, as I've already mentioned, proper good running clothing, and all the mandatory race kit that is often required when you're doing these ultramarathon events. So typically you'll need to bring an emergency blanket just so you can keep warm in the night if you need it, an extra base layer, 2 head torches, 1 primary and 1 spare, and you may even need to have some kind of waterproof trousers during the race vest, the list goes on. It's important just to invest a little bit of extra money in this gear, because it will be a one-time investment, and not only will it allow you to meet the mandatory requirements for race day, which is obviously very important, otherwise you won't be able to race, it can make you have a much more successful race, and even more importantly, it can keep you safe when you particularly need it. So gear is extremely important for running ultramarathons. Something I've learned the hard way on occasion on race day is to treat your pacing like a strategy. Running an ultramarathon is a huge undertaking, and you're going to be on your feet for a long time, and you want to make sure that you don't go off too quickly at the start, and you don't absolutely hammer the hills and the hills come around, or you know, the higher elevations, because if you do so, you know, in the early stages of the race, you've got to be on your feet for a lot longer, and you've got many miles to go in many instances. So you've really got to be thinking a few steps ahead and thinking of the long-term race rather than you know, the immediate present. Obviously if you're an elite runner, it might be a little bit different, and you do want to you know, hammer the hills, that sort of thing. But if you just want to have a fun and a successful race, you want to get around the course in a reasonable time, make sure that you pay attention to your heart rate, your body, and make sure you think a few steps ahead and treat your race day pacing with a little bit of strategy. You know, it's not a 5k, you're not going to be flying out of the start gate doing 6-minute miles or whatnot. It's going to be a really consistent effort over a long period of time. That's the goal anyway. Doesn't always work out like that, of course, as many of us that have done ultramarathons know, but yeah, pacing extremely important, probably one of the most important things on this list that I've learned. I've learned that crews and pacers on ultramarathons can be an extremely helpful element of your race day experience. So I would advise you to think about having a crew or a pacer for your first or whatever ultramarathon you're doing. Now, what are crews and pacers? Some ultramarathons allow runners to have crews rock up at certain points on the course. They're usually marked ahead of time, and the crews can you know, give the runner any kind of TLC, anything that they might need. Perhaps the runner's forgotten something, maybe the runner needs help having their shoes changed. It just makes things run a lot smoother. You know, just so you're not taking too much time in aid stations, and it's just really good moral support sometimes, just to know you've got friends and family or whoever happens to be in your crew helping at certain checkpoints. And also a pacer. Some runners, some races allow you to have pacers from a certain point, and they're not pacers in the traditional sense. You may have seen pacers in marathons, you know, maintaining a very quick pace just so that the lead runner, whoever it happens to be, knows the pace they need to be going at in order to get a good time. The pacer for ultramarathons tend to just keep you company as you go through the latter stages of the race. In particular, the night section is a good time to think about having a pacer. Just keeps your mind off of what can be quite a low point in the race, because by this point you're quite fatigued. Personally, I really value a crew and a pacer. I've only had crewing at one point in one ultramarathon, the North Downs Way 100, at about mile 73. My brother rocked up with my dad, bought me some Vaseline because I didn't have any more anti-chafing stuff with me. That was a massive help. Bought me some Lucozade, which was a nice change from the tailwind and the water that I've been swigging all day, which is becoming a bit bland. And then my brother, to my surprise, decided to pace the rest of the race with me, and he ran the last 26 or 27 miles from you know, mile 73 to the finish line. So that was a really big boost throughout the night section, and it kept my mind off of the problems and the troubles I was having at that point with my feet especially. So yeah, think about pacing, think about having a crew. That can be a big help on an ultramarathon. Well, there you have it, what I've learned from my first 5 ultramarathon experiences and some of my top tips that I've learned along the way, and hopefully they can help you whether you're doing your first ultramarathon or you've done many and you're just looking for some new tips and tricks. Hope you found it useful. Again, just want to stress, I'm by no means a pro, just figuring things out as I go, and these are things that I picked up along the way. I never intended to get into ultra running. I'd always been a road runner. I love 5Ks, 10Ks, half marathons were my favourite. I'd done up to about probably 25 half marathons, a couple of marathons, not very many, and then I took a a leap in the dark, entered London to Brighton last 2021, 100k, first ever ultramarathon. I absolutely loved it. Gotta say, the enjoyment I get out of ultramarathons is like something I've never experienced. I probably don't say that during the tough moments, during the night, but I think it's just such a special type of running. Community's fantastic, everybody's in it together, loads of positivity, loads of support. So yeah, just love it to bits. Hope you've enjoyed this video. I've been Craig. Try new things, try being more. I'll see you in the next one.